Welcome. If you have been here before, if you have sat with me on the shores of Ireland, or walked the Amazon forest in the dark, or listened to the cedar trees of Japan go quiet in the first snow of winter, then welcome back. I am glad you are still traveling, and if this is the first time you have found your way here, welcome. Sit down. You have not missed anything that cannot be caught up with, simply by being present now. I am the Veil Weaver. I collect stories from the thin places, the places where the boundary between the world you can see and the one you cannot has worn down to something almost transparent, where the two press so close together that a person standing very still, in the right spot, at the right moment, can feel the presence of the other side, a world that has always been there, running alongside this one, separated by less than most of us imagine. Tonight, I am taking you north, further north than most stories go, and further back than most histories reach, to the part of the world where the winters are long and absolute, and the darkness, when it comes, does not apologize for itself. It simply arrives and settles and stays, where the summers, in return, give light so generous and so persistent that a sun barely sets at all, and the sky at midnight is the color of a bruised peach, and the whole world seems briefly, beautifully unable to commit to the dark. We are going to the Nordic world, Norway, where the fjords cut so deep into the rock that standing at their edge is like standing at the hinge of the world. The water 1,000 feet below, the mountains on either side so sheer and so ancient that they make you feel not small exactly, but correctly scaled, reminded of your actual size, which is not a frightening thing, but an honest one. Sweden, where the pine forests go on and on in every direction, until the idea of an edge to them stops feeling relevant, where the trees are so old and so close together that the light between them arrives already filtered, already softened, already carrying the particular quality of a place that has been undisturbed for long enough to develop its own atmosphere, its own rules. Denmark, where the land is low and wide, and the sky is enormous above it, and the sea is never far, where the wind comes off the water with a directness that Danes have learned over many centuries to simply accept as a fact of being alive here, the way you accept gravity or the passage of time. And Iceland, that extraordinary, impossible island sitting alone in the North Atlantic, where the ground itself is still being made, where volcanoes and glaciers share a landscape with a matter-of-fact coexistence that seems to say, yes, this is where fire and ice meet, and this is simply what the world looks like when it is still working out what it wants to be. This is the world we are stepping into tonight, a world that has always known about the thin places, that has lived alongside them, worked around them, left offerings at them, built its stories and its calendar, and its deepest understanding of what it means to be alive around the knowledge that the visible world is not the whole of it. A world full of creatures, not the great gods of the Norse pantheon, not Odin on his throne, or Thor with his hammer, or the grand cosmic drama of Ragnarök. Those are magnificent stories, and other voices tell them well. The stories I carry are quieter than that, smaller in scale, if not in significance. The creature beneath the farmhouse floor, who has been keeping the family's luck since before the grandfather was born. The musician at the waterfall, whose playing is so beautiful that people have stood listening until their feet took root. The small, ancient, boulder-shouldered being on the hillside, who has been sitting in the same spot since before the hill had a name, and has developed, over all those centuries of sitting, a philosophical outlook on the human race that is equal parts exasperation and deep, helpless fondness. The hidden ones, the household ones, the wild ones, and the deep ones, and the ones that dance in the forest when they think no one is watching. 10 of them, tonight. 10 creatures from the long, cold, luminous, fire-lit memory of the Nordic world. Are you ready? Then pull your coat a little closer. The north wind is doing what it always does up here, moving across the landscape with the unhurried authority of something that has been doing this since long before anyone built walls against it. The sky above is very dark and very wide and scattered with stars that seem, at this latitude, almost unreasonably close. And somewhere beneath the ground, just here, just beneath the frost and the stone and the deep root-tangled dark of the earth below your feet, something is moving, something that has been here, in this place, for a very long time, and it knows you are here too. The veil is thin here. Let's step across. We begin underground, not in the dark, frightening underground of things that have been buried or forgotten, not the underground of endings, the other kind, the underground of parallel things, of a world that exists alongside ours, at the same depth as the roots of the oldest trees, in the same cold and patient dark as the foundations of the oldest houses, a world that is not beneath ours in any hierarchical sense, but simply beside it, running parallel, sharing walls. In Iceland, they call them the Huldufólk, the hidden people. Say it the Icelandic way if you can, Huldufólk, 2 syllables of hiding and 1 of people, which is exactly what they are. People, not monsters, not gods, not the terrifying beings as that populate the darker corners of Nordic mythology. People, with houses and families and the ordinary, sustaining daily business of lives being lived, just lives that happen to be lived on the other side of a boundary that most of us cannot see. They look, in the tradition, almost exactly like us. This is the first and most important thing to understand about the Huldufólk, the thing that sets them apart from almost every other hidden people in European folklore. They are not small, they are not monstrous, they are not grotesque or alien or difficult to look at. They are human in form, tall, well-dressed, handsome in the particular clear-featured way of people who have lived for a very long time in a landscape of extraordinary beauty and have been shaped by it, the way all people are shaped by the landscape they inhabit. They wear old clothes, not ragged, old in the way of things that have been well made and well kept for a very long time. The clothes of another century, perhaps. The clothes of people who exist at a slight angle to ordinary time. They live in the rocks. This is crucial, and it is specific, not underground in the sense of tunnels and caves, in the rocks themselves, in the great lava formations that cover so much of Iceland's surface, in the ancient volcanic outcroppings that dot the landscape with their strange, jagged, endlessly varied shapes. To a Huldufólk, a large rock is not a rock. It is a house, a neighborhood, a place where generations have lived and raised their children and gone about their business in the warm, hidden interior of the stone, invisible to anyone passing on the road outside. You have walked past their houses many times without knowing it. You may have sat on one Now here is the thing about Iceland that I want to dwell on for a moment, because it is one of the most remarkable things about any country in the modern world. Iceland believes. Not in the vague, comfortable, metaphorical way that people sometimes say they believe in things when they mean they find the idea pleasant. Not as folklore, safely contained in books and museums and the academic study of old traditions. Iceland believes in the Huldufólk, the way you believe in your neighbors, with the practical, matter-of-fact acknowledgement that they are there, that they have needs and preferences, and a right to consideration, and that ignoring them would be not just rude, but genuinely unwise. When Icelandic construction workers break their equipment inexplicably on a particular stretch of road, when machinery fails for no mechanical reason, again and again on the same site, when the workers themselves begin to feel, independently and without discussing it with each other, a strong and specific reluctance to continue. The foreman does not call a geologist. He calls someone who knows how to talk to the Huldufólk, a negotiator, a mediator, someone who understands the old courtesies and knows how to explain respectfully that the road needs to go through here, and to ask with genuine humility whether some accommodation can be reached. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the rock can be moved carefully, with ceremony, to a new location. Sometimes a different route can be found. Sometimes the Huldufólk simply need to be acknowledged, need to know that the people on the other side of the boundary are aware of them and are not proceeding out of carelessness or contempt, but out of genuine necessity, with genuine respect. Roads in Iceland have been rerouted around rocks, not because the engineers could not blast through them, because the people who live in those rocks asked them not to. And Iceland, being Iceland, considered this a reasonable request. I find this extraordinary. Not because I am surprised that the Huldufólk are there. I have known about the hidden people for a very long time, and I have my own reasons for not doubting their existence. What I find extraordinary is Iceland itself. This small, remote, geologically violent, extraordinarily modern island, with its geothermal energy and its universal literacy and its digital infrastructure and its remarkably sophisticated approach to almost every question of governance and social organization. This island has looked at the accumulated, living, unbroken tradition of its people and said, yes, we take this seriously. The hidden people are our neighbors, and we treat them accordingly. There is a survey conducted by the University of Iceland, not by folklorists, but by social scientists asking serious questions, that found a majority of Icelanders either believe in the Huldufólk or consider their existence possible. Not a fringe, not the elderly, a majority, across all ages, all education levels, all walks of life. What does that tell you? It tells you that Iceland has never made the mistake of confusing the modern with the complete, has never assumed that because we have mapped the surface of the world, we have understood it, has kept open, with admirable stubbornness and a certain quiet national pride, the possibility that the surface is not the whole of it, that beneath the road, beneath the frost and the lava rock and the deep, volcanic, endlessly active ground of this impossible island, someone is home. What is it like to live beside them? The accounts that have been collected over the centuries, and there are many, gathered by folklorists and by ordinary people, who simply wrote down what their grandparents told them, describe encounters with the Huldufólk that have a consistent, specific quality. They are not dramatic encounters, not visions, not visitations, not the overwhelming supernatural experience of the kind that leaves a person changed and trembling. They are neighborly encounters. A woman, coming home late across the lava field, sees a light in a rock she has passed 100 times. Not a reflection, a warm, steady, interior light, the kind that comes from a window. She stops. She looks. Through the stone, somehow she can see a room, small and warm and lit by firelight, with furniture and a table set for a meal, and a woman moving in the background, going about the ordinary business of an evening. Their eyes meet. Neither of them is frightened. The Huldufólk woman nods, the small, courteous nod of one neighbor acknowledging another across a fence. And then she moves away from whatever window the watching woman could see through, and the light in the rock returns to being simply a rock, and the woman on the path walks home and sits down by her own fire and thinks about what it means to share a landscape with people you cannot usually see, what it means that the world is that full. The Huldufólk are not, in the main, interested in us. This is important to understand. They are not waiting to be found, not hoping for contact, not lonely in any way that requires our company. They have their own full lives, their own concerns, their own seasons and celebrations, and the ordinary preoccupations of people who have been living in the same place for a very long time and know it completely. But they notice us. They pay attention to how we treat the landscape they share with us, whether we move through it with care or carelessness, whether we acknowledge the possibility of their presence or proceed as though nothing exists in the world that cannot be measured and mapped, whether we are, in the deepest sense of the word, good neighbors. Be a good neighbor. This is, distilled to its simplest form, everything the tradition of the Huldufólk asks of us. Not worship, not ritual, not the performance of specific ceremonies, or the leaving of specific offerings. Simply awareness, the willingness to move through the world as though it might be more inhabited than it appears, the courtesy of acting as though the rock you are about to blast through might have someone living in it, the courtesy of pausing before you proceed to ask. The rock beside the path is very still. It has been still for a very long time, longer than the path, longer than the people who made it, longer than any of the names that have been given to this stretch of land over the long centuries of Iceland's human habitation. The lichen on its north face is very old. The grass around its base has grown close and thick and undisturbed, the way grass grows around things that have been in the same place long enough for the ground to have arranged itself around them. Someone lives here. They are going about their evening in the warm interior of the stone, paying the same comfortable, half-attending quality of notice to the world outside that you pay to the street outside your window, aware of it, related to it, but not absorbed by it, busy with their own things. But they know you are there. They have known since you arrived, and they have decided, in the quiet, unhurried way of people who have been making these assessments for a very long time, that you are all right. Move carefully past the rock, and as you go, just the smallest nod, just the ordinary acknowledgement of one person passing another's house. It costs nothing. And in Iceland, it means everything. We are still in the hidden world, still in a part of the Nordic landscape, where the most important things are the things you cannot see. But we are moving now, away from the Icelandic lava fields, away from the rock and the frost and the extraordinary, impossible island in the North Atlantic, back to the mainland, to the flat fields of Scandinavia, to the farms and the forests, and the deep, familiar, long-inhabited landscape of the north, where the hidden people are not in the rocks, but in the land itself, in the fields beneath your feet, in the ground your grandfather's grandfather ploughed, year after year, never quite sure what he was ploughing around. Something is down there, something that has watched every generation of this farm come and go, and it has opinions. The farm has been here for a long time. You can tell by the way it sits in the landscape, not placed on it, the way newer buildings are placed, set down from above, with a certain indifference to the specific contours of the ground beneath them. This farm grew from the landscape. It found its position the way a tree finds its position, by putting down roots in the exact spot where the conditions were right, and staying there, and becoming over many generations so completely part of the place that it is now impossible to imagine the view without it. The fields around it are old, the boundaries of them, the low stone walls, the lines of ancient hedgerow, the particular angles at which one field meets another. These boundaries were established long ago and have been respected ever since. Not because anyone sat down and decided to respect them, because the farmers who worked this land understood, in the practical, unsentimental way of people whose living depends on their relationship with the ground beneath them, that some boundaries are not yours to move. They were here before you. They will be here after. The Vittra. The name comes from the Swedish tradition, though the creature it names, and the understanding of the world it represents, runs through the folklore of Norway and Denmark and the whole of Scandinavia, with the consistency of something that has been observed and reported and passed down, not because it makes a good story, but because it is simply true. The Vittra are the hidden people of the land itself, not of the rocks, like the Huldufólk, not of the underground in the dramatic, cavernous sense, of the ordinary ground, the field, the meadow, the particular stretch of earth between the farmhouse and the tree line that has been worked and walked and known for so many generations that it has become, in some essential way, part of the family, because the Vittra are part of the family, or something very close to it. They live beneath the farm, in a world that exists directly below this one, at the same coordinates, occupying the same space, running in exact parallel to the visible farm above. Their farmhouse is where your farmhouse is. Their fields are where your fields are. Their cattle move through the same ground as your cattle, invisible, going about the same seasonal business of grazing and sheltering, and the long, patient rhythms of agricultural life. Two farms, one place, each entirely unaware of the other, most of the time. Most of the time, the Vittra become visible, or rather the boundary between their world and yours becomes permeable under specific conditions. At dusk, when the light is ambiguous and the categories of the day have begun to loosen, in the places where the land has a particular quality of oldness, where the ground has been worked for so long that something in its texture has changed, become denser, more layered, more full of the accumulated presence of everything that has ever happened in it. And when the boundary between your world and theirs is disturbed, this is the crucial thing. The Vittra are peaceable neighbors. They ask very little, and they give a great deal, as we will come to. But they have one requirement that is not negotiable, that runs through every account of them with the particular emphasis of something that has been learned through experience more than once. Do not build on their roads. The Vittra have roads, paths, tracks, the routes they have travelled between their settlements and their fields and their gathering places since long before any human road in this landscape existed. These roads are invisible to us. There is no marking of them, no physical trace on the surface of the ground, but they are entirely real and entirely in use, and a human structure built across one of them will, without fail, cause problems. Not dramatic problems. The Vittra are not a vindictive people, but consistent ones, inexplicable ones. The barn built on a Vittra road develops structural problems that no carpenter can account for. The wall that crosses their path cracks and crumbles and is rebuilt and cracks again. The animals housed in the wrong place are restless at night, not frightened, not ill, simply unable to settle, the way any living thing is unable to settle when something invisible but present is moving through the space it is trying to sleep in. The cattle fall ill, the milk sours, the harvest is poor, for no reason that the weather or the soil or any observable factor can explain. And the farmer, if he is the right kind of farmer, the kind who has been told the old stories and has had the wisdom to keep them somewhere accessible rather than dismissing them entirely, will stop and think and go to the oldest person he knows and describe what has been happening. And the oldest person will nod slowly and say, "Where did you build?" And when the farmer describes the location, the oldest person will close their eyes and consult some internal map that is older than any map drawn on paper and say, "That is their road. Move the building." In the historical accounts, and there are many, collected by Scandinavian folklorists in the 18th and 19th centuries, from farmers who reported these things with the matter-of-fact directness of people describing a practical problem rather than a supernatural experience. The solution is always the same. Move whatever has been built on the road. Acknowledge the disruption. Leave something. Food, milk, the small courtesies of one neighbor to another, and wait. The problems stop. The cattle recover. The milk is good again, because the Vittra, once their road is clear and their space is respected, are extraordinarily good neighbors. The farm that has Vittra beneath it, the farm that has understood the old arrangement and operates within it, runs well. Not magically well, not in any way that cannot be explained by hard work and good land and the ordinary blessings of a decent season, but consistently well. The livestock are healthy, the harvests are reliable, the farm has a quality, noticed by visitors, remarked upon by neighbors, of being fortunate, of being in some way that is difficult to articulate, looked after, because it is. The Vittra are watching, from beneath, from their parallel farm, their parallel fields, their parallel daily life that runs alongside yours in the same ground. They are aware of you, of your work, your struggles, your seasons of abundance and your seasons of difficulty. They do not intervene, exactly. They do not reach through the boundary between the worlds and fix your problems. But there is something in the simple fact of their presence, their long, patient, deeply rooted presence in the same ground you are working, that seems to steady things, to keep the balance of the plot. They have, after all, been here longer than you. They know this land in ways you are still learning. And when the arrangement between you is right, when the boundaries are respected and the roads are clear and the old courtesies are observed, they share that knowledge, quietly and without ceremony, the way good neighbors share things, not as a gift, not as a transaction, but as the natural consequence of being in the same place for a long time and having decided, in the unhurried way of beings with all the time in the world, that you are worth being in the same place with. There is a tradition in parts of rural Sweden that persists in some communities to this day. When a new building is planned, a barn, an extension, any structure that will go into the ground, the farmer will walk the proposed site at dusk alone and stand in it for a while, not with instruments or calculations, simply standing, attending, letting the quality of the place speak to whatever in him is old enough to listen. If the place feels right, if it has that quality of ease, of welcome, of ground that has no objection to what is being proposed, the building proceeds. If it does not, if there is something in the quality of standing in that spot at that hour that is not comfortable, not frightening, simply not comfortable, in the specific way of a place where something is already happening, that your presence is interrupting, the farmer moves the plan, shifts the position, finds the spot nearby that feels easy, and builds there instead. He does not explain this to anyone in terms of the Vittra, necessarily. He does not invoke the old stories or the old names. He simply says, the other spot felt better. And everyone who hears this nods, because they know what he means. The field is very still this evening. The light is doing that Scandinavian thing it does in the late afternoon of an autumn day, going golden and low and long-shadowed, stretching everything out, making the ordinary landscape enormous and ancient and full of a depth that the midday light conceals. The stone walls glow. The grass is very green. The farmhouse at the edge of the field has its windows lit, that particular amber warmth of a house at dusk, that is, whatever country you are in, whatever century, one of the most reliable signals that something good is waiting inside. Beneath your feet, the Vittra are going about their evening, tending their own fires, seeing to their own cattle, moving along their roads in the last of the light, going where they need to go, doing what they have always done in the deep and patient parallel world of the land. They are aware of you standing here. They have assessed you in their quiet way, and they have decided you are the kind of person who knows how to stand in a field. Walk carefully on your way out. Stay off the old paths, the ones that run at a slight angle to the modern ones, the ones that seem to go nowhere useful, but that your feet want to follow anyway. Those are not yours. We are going deeper now, away from the surface, away from the fields and the amber farmhouse windows and the last of the autumn light, downward into the older, darker, more subterranean part of the hidden world, where the creatures are smaller and more ancient, and the ground above them is not a field, but a hillside, and the hillside has been hollow for longer than anyone has been keeping records of such things. The Tusser are waiting, and they have been waiting with the particular patience of things that live underground and have never needed to hurry for a very long time. Go deeper, past the roots of the oldest trees, past the frost line where the ground stops freezing in winter and maintains its own constant, unchanging temperature, regardless of what the sky is doing above, past the level where the soil is dark and rich and full of the busy, purposeful work of living things, breaking down and becoming other living things, past all of that, into the older layer beneath, the layer that is rock and compressed earth, and the long, slow geological memory of a landscape that was being made long before anything walked across its surface. Down here, it is quiet, not silent. The underground is never truly silent, if you have the right kind of ears for it. There is the movement of water through stone, the deep, almost subsonic settling of the earth going about its own enormous business. And beneath all of that, if you are very still and very patient, and you have come down far enough, the sound of small hammers, the creak of a door, the low, unhurried sound of voices in conversation, speaking a language that is older than the languages spoken above ground and has never had any particular reason to change. The Tusser. The name comes from the Norwegian tradition, though similar beings appear across the whole of Scandinavia under different names, in different regional variations, with different emphases that reflect the specific landscape and the specific community that kept their stories. But the essential character of them is consistent. Small, old, underground, deeply, comprehensively, almost aggressively settled in their ways. The Tusser are not the Vittra. This is worth being clear about. The Vittra are hidden, yes, but they are hidden in a world that parallels ours, that occupies the same space, that runs alongside the surface world, with a certain relationship to it. The Tusser have gone further than that. They have gone all the way down into the old stone dark and built their world there, in the deep places where the surface world's concerns, its weather, its seasons, its human dramas, arrive only as the faintest of vibrations through the rock. They have been down here for a very long time, long enough to have developed, as any community develops over sufficient time, a complete and self-sufficient culture. Their own architecture, low-ceilinged, built for people of their stature, which is considerable in some accounts, and quite small in others, depending on the tradition, but always adapted to the underground, in the way of things that have been underground long enough to stop thinking of it as a limitation and start thinking of it as simply the shape of home, their own agriculture, of a kind, the underground farming of fungi and roots, and the strange, pale, light independent things that grow in the deep places of the earth, their own crafts, their own music, which is nothing like the music of the surface world, and which, in the rare accounts of people who have heard it drifting up through the ground on still nights, is described as beautiful in a way that is difficult to explain. Beautiful in the way of very old things that have been refined over so much time that all the unnecessary parts have been worn away and only the essential remains, and their own opinions. The Tusser have opinions about everything, but most particularly about us. They have been living beneath human settlements for as long as there have been human settlements in these landscapes. Beneath the farms and the villages and the roads and everything that we have built on the surface of the land they occupy the deep of. They have felt, through the rock and the earth, every fence post driven, every foundation laid, every road built and rebuilt over the centuries. They have felt the weight of our buildings above them, the vibration of our daily lives, the particular quality of noise and movement and the general, cheerful, relentless disturbance that human communities produce simply by going about their business. They have, to put it plainly, a lot of data on us. And their conclusion, arrived at over many centuries of observation, is roughly this: humans are well-meaning, but not very attentive, capable of great things occasionally, prone to ignoring what is directly beneath their feet, consistently. The relationship between the Tusser and the humans above them is complicated, not hostile, not in the main, not the relationship of enemies or of predator and prey, more the relationship of very old neighbors who have been living in proximity for so long that they have developed a set of mutual understandings that functions reasonably well as long as everyone observes them, and breaks down in specific and predictable ways when they do not. The Tusser ask, essentially, three things: quiet at the right hours, not silence. They are not unreasonable, and they understand that a working farm above them will produce noise. But the deep hours, the hours between midnight and dawn when a surface world has no urgent business, those hours belong to the underground. And the Tusser, who do much of their most important work in those hours, have a legitimate grievance against whatever produces noise in them unnecessarily. Respect for the boundaries. The Tusser have their own sense of property, of which parts of the underground are theirs, and which are simply the general underground that nobody owns. These boundaries are not marked in any way visible to us, but they are real, and digging that crosses them, well digging, foundation digging, any of the excavations that surface life occasionally requires, will be felt immediately and responded to accordingly. And the third thing, this one is harder to name, but it runs through every account of the Tusser with a consistency that suggests it matters most of all. Be aware of us, not in the sense of performing specific rituals or making specific acknowledgements at specific times, in the simpler sense of not forgetting that the ground is inhabited, that the world goes further down than your foundations, that when you stamp across your kitchen floor at 2 a.m. for a glass of water, someone below you is putting down their tools and looking at the ceiling with an expression that, if you could see it, would be entirely recognizable as the expression of a person whose neighbor has no idea they exist. In the old accounts, the Tusser occasionally made themselves known when they felt sufficiently ignored. Not violently, not dramatically. In the specific, targeted, deeply personal way of beings who have been watching you long enough to know exactly which small disruptions will be most effective. The butter that will not churn, no matter how long you work it. The cow that gives less milk than she should, for no reason any veterinarian could identify. The particular creak in the floor that begins on a Tuesday and continues at irregular intervals for 3 weeks until you have started, despite yourself, to listen for it. The Tusser are not doing these things out of malice. They are doing them the way any overlooked neighbor eventually does something, not to cause harm, but to cause notice. To remind you, in terms you cannot ignore, that the world does not end at your floorboards. The remedies in the tradition are always proportionate. Leave them something. Food, traditionally, the Tusser, like most of the hidden folk, appreciate the acknowledgement that a well-placed offering represents. Not a grand gesture. A bowl of porridge set near the hearth. A cup of something left on the doorstep on a cold night. The small, ordinary generosity of someone who understands that they share their home with others and is acting accordingly. And then, this is the part that is easy to forget. Say something. Not loudly, not formally, in the same ordinary tone you would use to address someone through a floor. An acknowledgement, an apology, if one is owed. The simple statement of awareness that is, to the Tusser, worth more than any offering. I know you are there. I am sorry for the noise. I am glad you are here. The butter will churn again. The cow's milk will be what it should be. The creak in the floor will stop. Not because the Tusser have been appeased exactly. Not because the transaction has been completed. Because the relationship has been acknowledged. Because the person above ground has done the simple, sufficient thing of recognizing that they are not alone in their ground. And the Tusser below have registered this recognition and found it, after all their centuries of observation, as satisfying as they always do, which is considerably. They are a proud people, the Tusser. They do not ask for much. But what they ask for, they mean. The stone around us is very old, older than the farm above, older than the name of this place, older than any of the human arrangements on the surface. In the deep of it, in the warm and lamp-lit underground rooms, where the Tusser go about their ancient, self-sufficient, thoroughly organized lives. The evening is well advanced, and the work of the day is mostly done. And someone, an elder, probably, one of the very old ones who has been down here long enough to have opinions about every human family that has ever lived above this ground for the past 400 years, is telling a story. The others are listening. One of them glances up at the ceiling, at the rock and the earth and the floorboards somewhere far above, with the expression of someone checking on a thing they have long since made their peace with. The humans are quiet tonight. Good. The story continues. We are going deeper still, further into the mountain now, away from the fields and the farms and the inhabited underground of the Tusser, up into the high places where the rock is oldest and the snow lies longest, and the wind has carved the stone into shapes that seem, at certain angles in certain light, almost deliberate, almost made. In the deep heart of those mountains, in chambers that no human hand has ever found, and no human map has ever marked, the forges are burning, and the sound of hammering, precise, powerful, endlessly patient, rises through the rock like a heartbeat. Higher now, and deeper at the same time. This is the particular paradox of the mountain, that going up and going in are the same direction. That the higher you climb on the outside, the deeper the interior becomes. The rock thickens around the empty spaces within it. The chambers grow larger. The silence, when you find it, is more complete. A silence that has been accumulating down here for so long that it has become something with its own texture. its own weight, the silence of a place that has never needed noise and has never missed it. The mountains of Scandinavia are old. Not old in the way that makes you think of history, of battles and kingdoms and the human dramas that play out on their slopes. Old in the way that makes history seem recent. The Scandinavian mountains were here before the ice came, and before it went, and before the sea rose to its current level, and before the first human beings stood at the edge of the northern world and looked at this landscape and decided, with the particular stubbornness of a species that has never been entirely sensible about where it chooses to live, to stay. The mountains were here before all of that. And the dwarves were here before the mountains were lonely. Not before the mountains. That would be saying too much. And the dwarves themselves, who are precise about these things, would correct it immediately. But they have been in the mountains long enough that the distinction between the dwarves and the mountains has become, in some fundamental sense, academic. They know the rock the way the rock knows itself. They know where the veins of metal run, and where the crystal chambers open, and where the underground rivers have carved their patient, invisible courses through the stone over millions of years of slow and purposeful insistence. They know because they have been paying attention for a very long time. The dwarves of Norse mythology are among the most fully realized beings in any mythology anywhere in the world. I say this having spent considerable time in most of them. Other traditions have craftsmen, have underground beings, have the idea of a people who make things of extraordinary quality in the deep places of the earth. But the Norse dwarves have a specificity, a completeness, a sense of being a fully developed civilization with its own history and politics, an artistic tradition, an internal argument that sets them apart. They are not a supporting cast. They are a people. In the old texts, the prose Edda, the poetic Edda, the vast accumulated body of Norse mythological literature that was written down in Iceland in the 13th century, but carries within it traditions far older than any manuscript. The dwarves appear again and again as the makers of the most significant objects in the Norse world. Not the largest objects, not the most dramatic, the most significant. Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, the weapon that holds the order of the cosmos together, that keeps the giants from overrunning the world of gods and humans, made by dwarves. Gungnir, Odin's spear, the weapon that never misses, that was used to cast the first ritual of war, made by dwarves. Gleipnir, the ribbon that bound the wolf Fenrir, the silken seeming restraint that holds one of the great dangers of the world in check until Ragnarök, made by dwarves. Made, specifically, from things that do not exist. From the sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. 6 impossible ingredients, combined by dwarven craft into something that looks like nothing. A thin ribbon lighter than air, and holds like everything. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful binding in the Norse cosmos is made of things that do not exist. The dwarves looked at the problem of restraining something that could not be restrained by any conventional means, and their solution was to make something from the ingredients of impossibility itself, to take the uncanny and the paradoxical and apply to it the same patient, exacting, deeply considered craft that they would apply to forging a sword or setting a gem. The result is not a weapon. It is not impressive to look at. It does not announce itself. It simply works. This is, I think, the deepest truth about the dwarves, that their craft is not about display, not about the impressive object that demonstrates power, though they make those too when asked, and they make them better than anyone. Their craft, at its most essential, is about the right solution to the real problem, about understanding what is actually needed and making exactly that, with exactly the quality required, with no excess and no deficiency, and no flourish that serves the maker's pride rather than the object's purpose. They are, in this sense, the most honest craftsmen in any mythology. They make what is needed, nothing more, nothing less. The dwarves in the old stories are not always easy company. They are proud, genuinely, justifiably proud, in the way of people who are very good at something and know it, and have no particular interest in pretending otherwise. They are independent. They operate on their own terms in their own time, according to their own standards. And any attempt to rush them or to compromise the quality of their work is met with the particular cold displeasure of a craftsman who has been asked to do something badly and has no intention of complying. They can be competitive. There are stories of dwarven craftsmen making extraordinary things, not because anyone needed them, but because a bet was made, or a reputation was at stake, or the simple, driving, entirely comprehensible need to make something better than it has ever been made before took hold and would not let go. The story of the making of Mjolnir turns famously on a bet. Loki, who is always Loki, always the accelerant in the Norse world's engine, always the one whose boredom generates the situations that everyone else has to resolve. Loki made a bet with a dwarf named Brokkr, that Brokkr and his brother Sindri could not make 3 objects finer than the 3 objects that another group of dwarves had just made for the gods. Sindri and Brokkr accepted. They went to their forge, deep in their mountain, in the hot and hammering dark of the place where the best work happens, and they began. Sindri worked the forge. Brokkr worked the bellows, keeping the fire at exactly the temperature required, steady and constant, not varying by a single degree. This was essential. Sindri told him so. The bellows must not stop, not for any reason. The quality of what they were making depended on an uninterrupted fire, and an interrupted fire would mean a flawed object, and a flawed object was not something Sindri was willing to put his name to. Loki, watching, decided to interfere. He transformed himself into a fly, and he bit Brokkr on the hand. Brokkr did not stop working the bellows. He bit him again, harder. Brokkr did not stop. A third time, on the neck, this time, as hard as a fly has ever bitten anything. Brokkr faltered, just for a moment, just long enough for the fire to drop a fraction of a degree at exactly the wrong moment. The hammer came out slightly flawed. The handle was shorter than it should have been. A small imperfection, barely noticeable, the kind of thing that in any other object would be insignificant. In Mjolnir, it simply meant that Thor had to hold it with one hand instead of 2. It still worked perfectly. It still never missed. It still held the order of the cosmos together for as long as the cosmos required holding. Brokkr was furious about the handle. Sindri was furious about Loki. And the gods, examining the 3 objects that Sindri and Brokkr had made, the golden hair they had made for Sif, the ship skidbladnir that could sail any sea and fold to fit in a pocket. And the hammer declared that the hammer was the finest thing any dwarf had ever made. Brokor won the bet. He was still furious about the handle. This is, I think, the most dwarvish detail in the whole of Norse mythology. Not the making of the impossible thing, not the winning of the bet, the continuing fury about the handle, the inability, or rather the refusal, to accept that something made imperfectly is acceptable, even when the imperfection is minor and the object is magnificent, and everyone else considers the whole affair a triumph. The standard is the standard. It was not met. That matters. That will always matter to a dwarf. There is something I find very moving about this. Not the fury itself, but what the fury represents. A commitment to the work that is so complete and so genuine that even a forced error, an external interference, a sabotage that was not the craftsman's fault, is experienced as a personal failure. Not because of pride exactly, because of love. The dwarves love what they make, not in a sentimental way, not in the way of an artist who becomes attached to their work and cannot let it go, in the way of a craftsman who understands that the object they are making is going to go out into the world and do things and be used and depended on, and that the quality of the work is not an abstract virtue, but a practical reality that will matter somewhere, to someone, in ways that cannot always be foreseen. Mjolnir held the world together. The handle was too short. It still worked, but it should have been right. The forge is very warm down here. The light of it, orange and gold and flickering, the particular, sourceless, all-directional light of a space lit entirely by fire, catches the walls of the chamber and the tools hanging in their ordered rows, and the faces of the dwarves going about their work with the focused, unhurried, completely absorbed quality of people who are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing and have never once doubted it. They are not aware of you, particularly. Or if they are, they have assessed your presence and found it neither threatening nor interesting enough to interrupt their work for. This is, from a dwarf, about as warm a welcome as you are likely to receive. Watch for a while. Watch the way the hammer falls, and where it falls in the rhythm of it. Not mechanical, not the mindless repetition of a machine, but the alive, responsive, constantly adjusting rhythm of a skilled hand doing skilled work. Watch the way the metal moves under it, the way the craftsman's eyes track what is happening with a speed and precision that suggests the evaluation is happening faster than thought, that the hand and the eye and the metal have entered into a conversation that the conscious mind is no longer required to moderate. This is what mastery looks like. Not the finished object. This. The fire is very bright. The hammering continues, steady and purposeful, rising through the mountain the way a heartbeat rises through a body. Unnoticed, unceasing, the sound of something alive and working and entirely committed to the task. We are going to leave the underground now. All of it, the rock chambers of the dwarves, the lamplit rooms of the Tusser, the parallel fields of the Vittra, the warm interior of the Huldufólk stone. We have spent a long time in the hidden world, and it has been extraordinary, cold and deep and full of beings who have been here since before the mountains had their names, going about their ancient, self-sufficient, completely parallel lives in the dark below our feet, but the surface is calling. And on a surface, up above the snowline, up where the rock breaks through the earth, and the wind has nothing between it and the horizon, and the sky at night is enormous and scattered with stars that seem, at this latitude, almost close enough to touch. Something very large is sitting on a boulder. It has been sitting there for a long time. It is not in any hurry. And it is watching the path below with the patient, slightly amused expression of something that has seen every kind of traveller pass this way over many centuries, and has developed, through long observation, very firm opinions about all of them. Take a breath. Feel the difference of it. The cold, clean, enormous difference of open air after all that time underground. The sky above is vast and pale and moving. Great slow weather systems drifting across it from the west, with the unhurried authority of things that have been doing this since long before anyone stood beneath them and looked up. The ground beneath your feet is rock, bare, ancient, scraped clean by glaciers that came and went long before the oldest human memory of this landscape begins. Up here, the world has a different scale, not the intimate scale of the farm and the field and the underground chamber, not the human scale of doors and windows and the warm, manageable geometry of a life being lived in a specific place. The scale up here is geological, planetary, the scale of things that were made by forces too large and too slow to be called events, that simply happened over millions of years. The way continents happen, the way mountain ranges happen, the way the shape of the world happens when no one is watching and nothing is in a hurry. This is troll country. And the first thing to understand about trolls, the single most important piece of information I can give you before we go any further, is that they are not what you think they are. I say this, knowing that you arrive here carrying a considerable amount of luggage. The troll has been one of the most enthusiastically reimagined creatures in the whole of world folklore. It has been made small, and made large, and made comic, and made terrible, and made into a toy, and made into a video game enemy, and made into a thing that lives under bridges demanding tolls from passing goats. It has been, in short, thoroughly processed by the machinery of modern storytelling, until what remains bears only a passing resemblance to what it originally was. So, set it down, all of it. The bridge, the goats, the toy shop. Set it down and let me show you what was here before any of that. The original troll. In the oldest layers of Scandinavian folklore, in the accounts collected from farmers and fishermen and the people who actually lived alongside these mountains and these forests and these long, dark, demanding winters, the troll is not a comic figure. It is not a figure of simple menace either. It is something considerably more interesting than either of those things. It is ancient, genuinely, incomprehensibly, geologically ancient. The trolls in the oldest Norse understanding are not merely old in a way that a very old person is old, or even in the way that a very old institution is old. They are old in the way that the mountains themselves are old, because in some accounts, they are the mountains. Or rather, some mountains are trolls. Trolls that have been sitting in the same spot for so long, that have become so thoroughly part of the landscape, that the distinction between the creature and the rock it sits on has dissolved completely, turned to stone by the sunrise. This is the famous detail that trolls caught in sunlight turn to stone, and it is usually told as a weakness, a vulnerability, the thing that makes them possible to defeat. But consider it from the other direction. Consider what it means that there are, in the Scandinavian landscape, outcroppings and boulders and peculiar rock formations that the people who lived beside them for generations looked at and said, "That is a troll." Not that it looks like a troll, that it is one, that the particular shape of that boulder, the specific quality of presence it has in the landscape, the way it sits on its hillside with an air of such settled, immovable, permanent being, these are not geological accidents. That is a face. That is a shoulder. That is a troll that has been sitting in the same spot since before the glacier came through, and has every intention of sitting there until the glacier comes back. The trolls in the living tradition are large. This varies. Some accounts describe them as enormous, the size of houses, the size of hills. Others make them more modest, merely much larger than a person, in the range of something that could pick up a cow without particular effort. But they are always large in a sense that matters most. Large in presence. Large in the quality of the space they occupy. The sense, encountering one, that the landscape around it has reorganized itself to accommodate its presence, the way a room reorganizes itself around a very large piece of furniture. They are, in the old accounts, slow. Not stupid. This is a crucial distinction, and it is one the old stories are careful about. The trolls are not unintelligent. They are slow in the way that very old, very large things are slow, in the way that mountains are slow. Their timescale is different from ours. What feels to us like a long pause before an answer is, to a troll, simply the appropriate amount of time to consider a question properly before responding. What feels to us like stubbornness is, to a troll, simply the entirely reasonable refusal to change a position that has been working perfectly well for several centuries on the basis of an argument that was made up yesterday. They have seen too much to be in a hurry about anything. They have been here for the Ice Age, several of them. They have watched the sea rise and fall and rise again. They have watched the forests come and go and come back. They have watched the humans arrive. That recent, energetic, endlessly surprising development in the long history of this landscape, and set up their farms and their villages and their roads and their complicated arrangements with each other. And they have observed all of this with the particular quality of attention that comes from watching something that moves very fast through a world you experience very slowly. Humans to a troll are something like weather, not unimportant. Weather is not unimportant, but fast, changeable, there and then gone before you have quite finished thinking about them. In the folklore, the relationship between trolls and humans is genuinely complicated. Not simply dangerous, not simply benign, complicated in the way of any relationship between two beings that share a landscape, but experience it at completely different speeds and scales. The troll in the classic encounter is often portrayed as the obstacle, the thing in the way, the creature whose size and power and territorial instinct puts it in conflict with the smaller, weaker, more clever human who must somehow find a way through or around it. And these stories are real. The trolls are territorial. They do not particularly welcome human intrusion into their high places, and their response to such intrusion has, in the old accounts, occasionally been dramatic. But there is another tradition, less famous, less dramatic, told less often because it makes a quieter kind of story. The tradition of the troll who is simply there, present on its hillside, part of the landscape in the same way the boulder is part of the landscape. Not threatening, not welcoming, not particularly interested in the humans below, simply occupying its place in the world with the total, unself-conscious completeness of something that has never had any reason to question whether it belongs here. There are farmers in the Norwegian tradition who had what they described as a neighboring troll, a large, ancient, permanently resident being on the hillside above the farm, who was simply part of the landscape, part of the arrangement of the place, something that had been there before the farm and would be there after, and whose presence was registered with the same practical acceptance as the presence of the mountain itself. You worked around it. You did not build where it walked. The few paths it still used, worn deep into the hillside by centuries of the same enormous feet going the same short distances. You did not make loud noises at the wrong hours. The troll, like the Tusser, had its own rhythms, and disrupting them was unwise, not because the troll would necessarily do anything dramatic in response, but because something that large, moving with purpose toward a source of irritation, is undesirable, regardless of its intentions. And occasionally, this is the detail I find most affecting in all the troll accounts. Occasionally, the troll would do something that could only be described as helpful. The boulder that appeared overnight in the gap in the fence, neatly plugging a hole that the farmer had been meaning to fix for months. The fallen tree that someone had moved off the path before anyone came to clear it, moved so far off the path, and with such force that the roots were still in the air, and the weight of it would have required 10 men with ropes. The winter, when the snow came so hard and so fast that the drifts around the farm buildings were threatening to collapse the roofs, and in the morning they were cleared, just cleared, packed back from the walls with a thoroughness and efficiency that no human shovel could have achieved overnight. No one saw who did it. No one asked. The farmer looked at the cleared snow and then looked up at the hillside, where the familiar dark shape was sitting in its familiar place against the pale winter sky. He nodded and went in for his breakfast. This is, I think, the true nature of the troll at its best. Not the monster under the bridge, not the comic giant outwitted by the clever youngest son. Something older and more dignified than either, a being so deeply rooted in its landscape that it has become, over the centuries, genuinely invested in the well-being of that landscape and everything in it, including, occasionally, and in its own enormous and unhurried way, the small, fast creatures who have built their small, fast lives on the slopes below. It does not particularly like us. It has, over a very long time, become fond of us anyway, the way you become fond of weather, perhaps. The boulder on the hillside is very still. It has been still for so long that the lichen on its north face has grown into a pattern that looks, from a certain angle, in a certain light, almost like an expression, a very old expression, the expression of something that has been watching the path below for so long that watching has become less an activity and more a quality, a permanent, settled, faintly amused orientation toward the world, and everything passing through it. The wind moves across the high ground in long, slow waves. Far below, the lights of the farm are very small and very warm. The boulder does not move. It will not move tonight, or tomorrow night, or in any of the nights that follow, in the long, cold, starlit sequence of a Nordic winter. It will be here when the snow comes, and when the snow goes, and when the brief, extraordinary summer turns the high places green, for a few weeks before the cold returns. It has always been here. It will always be here. And if you stand very still on a path just below the boulder and look up at it against the enormous sky, you will feel, quite clearly, and without any possibility of mistaking it for something else, that it is looking back. Not, if you feel moved to. It has seen worse manners than yours, and considerably better. Come down from the high places now, down from the bare rock and the ancient boulders and the vast, cold geological scale of troll country. The path descends through the snow line and back into the tree line, into the pine forest, where the scale becomes human again, and the sky is filtered through branches, and the ground is soft with needles, and the particular quality of the forest light, which is never quite the same as the light anywhere else, begins to do its quiet work on the mind. The pine forest at dusk, the last of the light coming through the trees at a low angle, catching the dust and the pollen and the tiny suspended particles of the forest air and turning them briefly, beautifully gold. And in that gold light, just at the edge of where the trees thin slightly and the light gets through most clearly, a movement, not the movement of something large and slow, something light, something quick, something that moves the way music moves, with a logic and a grace that is not random and not mechanical, but something between the two, something that follows its own internal structure, the way a melody follows its own internal structure, inevitable and surprising at the same time, more than one of them, many more. And now, listen, because there is sound with the movement, faint, very faint but real, a high, complex, layered sound that is not quite music and not quite voices, but something that partakes of both. Something that the forest seems to be producing rather than something happening in the forest, as though the trees themselves have begun, in this particular light at this particular hour, to sing. Stay very still. You are about to see something that very few people have seen. The Älvor are dancing. Do not move. I mean this seriously, not the gentle, atmospheric, do not move of someone setting a scene. The practical, urgent, entirely sincere do not move of someone who knows that what is happening in that light between the trees will stop the moment it becomes aware of being watched by something that does not belong to it. Breathe slowly. Let your eyes go soft, not focused, not the sharp, directed gaze of someone looking for something, but the wide, peripheral, receptive gaze of someone simply present in a place and allowing the place to show them what it contains. This is how you see the Älvor. Not by looking at them directly, by allowing them to become visible in the edges of your attention, the way the first stars of the evening become visible, not by staring at the place where they should be, but by looking slightly away and letting them arrive. There, in the space between the three oldest pines, the ones whose trunks are so wide that two people with outstretched arms could not encircle them, whose bark is the deep, furrowed, ancient red-brown of trees that have been growing for centuries, and have long since stopped keeping track. In the shaft of low golden light that falls between them, catching the mist that rises from the forest floor in the cooling air of the early evening, they are dancing the Älvor, the Swedish word, plural of Älvor, the singular, related to the English elf, the German Alb, the Old Norse Olf, a word that spreads across the Germanic languages like the roots of a very old tree, all of them pointing toward roughly the same thing, and none of them quite capturing it. Because the Älvor are not elves in the sense that the word has accumulated since, not the small, pointy-hatted, workshop-dwelling helpers of later tradition, not the tall, grave, immortal beings of high fantasy. They are something older than either of those imaginings, and considerably less interested in us than either version suggests. They are the light itself, almost. Or rather, they are what happens in certain lights in certain places at certain hours, when the world is briefly, perfectly balanced between one state and another. The light between day and dark, the air between the forest and the open ground, the hour between the end of work and the beginning of rest, when the practical demands of the day have released their grip and something else, something older and less purposeful and considerably more beautiful, is briefly possible. They appear as women in most accounts, or as something that the eye, reaching for the nearest available category, resolves into women, luminous, light-footed, moving with a grace that is not the grace of a person who has learned to move gracefully, but the grace of something for which graceful movement is simply the natural state, as natural as standing still is for a stone, or flowing is for water. They are very beautiful. This is always in the accounts, always mentioned, always with a quality of helpless accuracy, not the beauty of a face that can be described feature by feature, but the beauty of a phenomenon, the beauty of light through water, the beauty of the way a murmuration of starlings moves as a single organism through the sky, each individual part of a larger pattern, the pattern itself more beautiful than any of its components. They dance. This is the central, defining, absolutely consistent thing about the Älvor across every account in every part of Sweden and Norway where they appear. They dance, not as performance, not for an audience, not because dancing is what you do on certain occasions. They dance the way the river flows, because it is their nature, because it is what they are, because the alternative to dancing is simply not being an Älvor. The dance has a particular quality that the accounts struggle to describe, but agree on in their struggling. It is not frantic, not wild in the way of things that have lost control. It is precise and free at the same time, structured and spontaneous simultaneously. It follows rules that are not visible, but are clearly real, that organize the movement of many individuals into something coherent without constraining any of them. The way the rules of music organize notes into something coherent without constraining the melody. And where they dance, the ground remembers. In the morning, on the forest floor, or in the meadow where the Älvor danced the night before, you will find the marks of it. Circles in the grass, the elf dancer, the elf dances, the fairy rings, not the trampled, chaotic circles of animals moving in patterns, but precise ones, geometric. The grass inside them different from the grass outside, greener sometimes, or paler, or simply different in a way that is difficult to articulate, but immediately obvious to anyone who steps across the boundary between the inside and the outside of the circle. The old tradition was very clear about the fairy rings. Do not step inside them, not because the Älvor will harm you. In the gentler tradition, harm is not their intention and has never been their nature, but because the inside of the circle exists. For as long as the memory of the dance persists in the ground, in a slightly different relationship to time than the outside, stories of people who stepped into an Elfdans ring are consistently stories about time, about people who were inside for what felt like minutes and emerged to find hours had passed, or about people who danced with the Älvor through what seemed like a single evening and came out into a morning that was years later than the one they left. The Älvor do not experience time the way we do. Inside the circle, neither do you. In the old Swedish countryside, the elf dancer were taken seriously as practical information. Farmers walking their fields in the early morning would note the location of the rings and factor them into the day's work, not avoiding them out of fear exactly, but out of the same practical respect with which they avoided the Vittra's roads and the trolls' paths. An acknowledgement that the landscape contains more than one set of operating principles, and that the sensible thing is to know which principles apply where. There are other marks the Älvor leave. The dew on certain mornings, heavier in some spots than others, with a quality that is not quite the same as ordinary dew. Colder, perhaps. More persistent. The last to evaporate as the day warms. In the old tradition, this was called Elverdag, elf dew, and it was considered to have properties. Not magical properties in the dramatic sense, practical ones. Farmers' wives collected it for its effect on the skin. Healers used it. The oldest women in the community knew which mornings it was likely to appear and where, and went out early with small cloths to gather it. They did not question where it came from. They knew where it came from. There is a quality to the Elfdag that I want to try to describe, because it is, I think, the most honest expression of what the Älvor actually are and what they actually do in the world. It is the residue of the dance, the physical trace of something that was, for the duration of the dance, completely outside the ordinary economy of the world, something that existed purely for its own sake, for the sake of beauty and movement and the particular, purposeless, entirely sufficient joy of dancing in a forest at the turn of the day. And in the morning, that residue is there, in the grass, in the dew, in the rings. Not because the Älvor intended to leave it, not as a gift or a message or any kind of communication with the world of humans, simply as the natural consequence of something extraordinary having happened in an ordinary place. The extraordinary always leaves a trace, even when it did not mean to, even when it was not aware anyone was watching. Which brings us back to now, to the light between the three old pines, which has shifted slightly as we have been standing here, gone from gold to something softer, more amber, the light of the last minutes before the sun drops below the tree line and the forest goes from lit to luminous to dark. They are still dancing. They have not noticed you. Or, and this is the other possibility, the one that occurs to me the longer I stand here watching, they have noticed you, and they have made the assessment that every wild thing makes of every observer, that you are still enough, quiet enough, sufficiently not a threat, to be allowed to continue watching, that you have, in your stillness and your patience and your willingness to simply be present without demanding anything of the moment, earned the view. The dance continues. The light continues to shift. And somewhere in the forest, not far from here, closer than you might expect, closer than feels entirely comfortable now that you are aware of it, the sound of water. Not the gentle sound of a stream running over stones. Something larger than that. Something with more force to it, more presence. The sound of water falling a long way onto rock. The sound of a waterfall in full voice, filling the forest with a white noise that is, once you hear it, somehow the foundation of everything else you are hearing. The birds, the wind in the upper branches, the music of the Älvor's dance, all of it built on top of that sound. All of it, in some sense, a response to it, and woven through the sound of the water, so close to it in quality that at first you think you are imagining it, that the waterfall is simply doing something interesting with its acoustics, music, a fiddle, playing something so beautiful that your feet, before your mind has quite caught up with what is happening, have already begun to move toward it. Follow the sound, not quickly. There is no need for speed here, and hurrying toward a Fossegrim is exactly the wrong approach, like hurrying toward the end of a piece of music because you want to hear how it finishes. The point is not the arrival, the point is the approach. The way the sound grows as you move towards it, filling more and more of your hearing until the ordinary sounds of the forest, the birds, the wind, the creak of the old pines settling in the cooling air, become not absent, but secondary, background, the setting rather than the thing itself. The waterfall is ahead. You can feel it before you see it, a change in the air, a coolness and a dampness that the forest has been gradually building toward without your noticing. The way a conversation builds towards something important without announcing it. The rock beneath the moss is wet. The ferns are enormous here, lush in a way that speaks of constant moisture. The deep, saturated green of plants that have never known drought and never will. The sound is very large now, and then the trees open, and there it is. Not a dramatic waterfall, not the thunder of Niagara, not the vertigo of something falling from a great height. A Nordic waterfall, which is to say, exactly the right size. The size of something that has found its own perfect scale in the landscape and settled there, the way the best things in nature find their scale. Not too large to be intimate, and not too small to command the space. White water, falling perhaps 30 feet onto black rock, spreading into a shallow, fast-moving pool that catches the last of the evening light and throws it back in pieces. The noise of it fills everything, and underneath the noise, woven through it, using it the way a singer uses accompaniment, the way the melody uses the chord, the fiddle. Sit down, find a rock at the edge of the pool, one of the flat ones, still holding the warmth of the day in its surface. Sit down and be still, and let your eyes find what your oars have already found. There, at the base of the waterfall, on a rock that juts out over the pool, just far enough that the spray catches it, and him, in a fine, constant mist, sitting with the ease of someone entirely at home, in a position that would be, for anyone else, deeply uncomfortable, wet, cold, precarious. The rock is slick, and the spray is relentless, and the noise is enormous, and he is, in the middle of all of this, playing, The Fossegrim, the name is Norwegian, foss, meaning waterfall, and grim, an old word that carries connotations of a masked or hidden being, a presence that conceals itself, that is not immediately what it appears. The waterfall's hidden one, the spirit in the fall, the being that the water is not separate from but continuous with, that lives in it the way a melody lives in a piece of music, inseparable from it, only fully itself when the water is moving. He looks, in most accounts, like a young man, beautiful in the particular, slightly unsettling way of beings that are beautiful, because beauty is simply their nature, rather than because their features happen to be arranged pleasingly. Not a beauty that invites approach, a beauty that invites stillness. The instinct, seeing him, is not to move closer, but to stop moving entirely. The way you stop moving when you see something extraordinary in the natural world. The way the sight of certain things produces not desire, but a kind of reverent arrest. He is completely absorbed in the playing. This is the first and most important thing about the Fossegrim. He is not performing. He is not playing for an audience, not for you, not for anyone. He is playing because playing is what he is, because the music and the water, and the particular, irreplaceable moment of this evening light on this waterfall are inseparable from each other and from him. And the fiddle is simply the instrument through which the whole arrangement expresses itself. You are hearing something that was happening before you arrived and will continue after you leave. You are not the reason for it. This is, paradoxically, what makes it so beautiful. The music itself. Let me try to describe it, knowing that description will fail and attempting it anyway, because some things deserve the attempt even when the result is inadequate. It is not a melody in the way that most music has a melody, a line that goes somewhere, that has a beginning and a development and an arrival. It is more circular than that, more like weather than like narrative. It returns to itself constantly, but never quite the same way twice. Each return slightly different, slightly more complex, as though the melody is learning something about itself each time it comes around and incorporating what it has learned into the next iteration. It is the sound of water given structure, the sound of everything the waterfall is doing, the falling, the impact, the spread, the turbulence, the settling, the constant replenishment, translated into something that human ears can follow and human hearts can feel, without losing any of the water's essential nature, its indifference, its constancy, its complete and total commitment to going where gravity takes it, without hesitation, without regret, without any consideration of what it leaves behind. The Fossegrim does not write his music, he finds it. In the waterfall, in the particular waterfall, in the specific acoustic properties of this fall on this rock, in this light at this hour. Every Fossegrim is specific to his waterfall. They are not interchangeable, not generic water spirits who could be moved from one fall to another without loss. The Fossegrim of this waterfall knows this waterfall the way a musician knows a particular instrument that has been played for decades, its resonances and its quirks, and the specific things it can do that no other instrument can do. He and the water have been making music together for a very long time. The tradition of the Fossegrim in Norwegian folklore is one of the richest and most specific in the whole Nordic world. He appears consistently across centuries of collected accounts as a teacher as well as a performer. the great fiddlers of Norway, the Hardingfield players, the masters of the Hardanger fiddle, that extraordinary, resonant, sympathetic stringed instrument that is Norway's national instrument and one of the most beautiful sounding objects ever made. The great players of this tradition were said, in the old stories, to have learned from the Fossegrim. Not metaphorically learned, actually learned, gone to the waterfall, made the offering, always the same offering in the accounts, a piece of meat thrown into the fall on a Thursday night, which is the night the Fossegrim is most accessible, the night when the boundary between his world and ours is thinnest. Waited. And if the Fossegrim accepted the offering, if he emerged from the spray and took the fiddle from the player's hands and placed his own cold, wet fingers over theirs and played, the player would feel it, not hear it, feel it, in the fingers, in the tendons, in the muscles of the bowing arm, a knowledge being transferred not through instruction, but through direct transmission. The Fossegrim's understanding of the music passing into the player's hands the way water passes into dry ground. And after that, the player could play. Not adequately, not competently, could play in the way that made people stop talking in the middle of a sentence and turn toward the sound. Could play in the way that made the hairs rise on the arms of people who thought they did not particularly care about music. Could play in the way that the best players of the Hardanger fiddle have always played, as though the music is coming through them rather than from them, as though they are the instrument and something else is doing the playing. The Fossegrim's gift. There are conditions in the tradition. There are always conditions with the Fossegrim, because he is generous but not unconditional, and because the gift he gives is real and large and deserves to be taken seriously. He will not teach someone who does not already love the music. This is the most important condition and the one most consistently emphasized in the accounts. The offering, the Thursday night, the waterfall. None of these matter if the person making them does not already, genuinely, in the deepest part of themselves, love the fiddle, love the music, not want to impress people with the playing or desire the status of being known as a great musician. Love it, the way you love something that you would pursue, even if no one ever knew you were doing it, even if it never brought you anything except the thing itself. The Fossegrim knows the difference. He has always known the difference. And to those who love it, to those who come to the waterfall not to acquire a skill, but because the music has called them there, and they have had the sense to follow the call, he is extraordinarily generous, patient in a way that is not the patience of someone suppressing impatience, but the genuine, natural patience of a being for whom time at a waterfall is simply time well spent, regardless of what happens in it. He will play until you understand, however long that takes. There is a story, one of my favorites in the whole Nordic tradition, of a young woman who came to the waterfall 3 Thursday nights in a row, and the Fossegrim did not appear. The offering was taken. The meat was gone by morning, but there was no teaching, no cold hands over hers, no transmission. On the 4th Thursday, she came back. She did not bring an offering. She simply sat by the waterfall with her fiddle and played. Badly, haltingly, with all the imprecision of someone who has been playing for 2 years and knows exactly how far she is from what she is trying to reach. She played the tunes she knew, imperfectly. She played the beginnings of tunes she didn't quite know yet. She played a thing that was not quite a tune at all, something she had been trying to find for months. Something that existed in her head as a shape rather than a sequence of notes, that she kept approaching and losing and approaching again. The spray from the waterfall was very cold. The light was going. And then, from the rock at the base of the fall, a fiddle joining hers, not correcting it, not replacing it, joining it, finding the shape she was reaching for, and playing it alongside her, not ahead of her, but with her, so that the thing that had existed only as an intention in her mind became, for the first time, actual sound. She wept. She kept playing, and the Fossegrim played with her until the tune was finished, and the night was very dark, and the forest around the waterfall had gone quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when something important is happening, and the rest of the world has the wisdom to give it room. Then he stopped and slipped back into the water, and she sat for a long time on her wet rock with the fiddle in her lap and the tune completely in her fingers for the first time in the months she had been trying to find it. She came back the following Thursday with the offering, and the Thursday after that, and she became, in the years that followed, one of the great Hardanger fiddlers of her region. People came from 3 valleys away to hear her play. They said there was something in her playing that they could not name, a quality that went beyond technique, beyond the notes themselves, into something that felt like the music was coming from somewhere deeper than a single person's skill. She never told them about the waterfall. Some gifts are not meant to be explained, only played. The Fossegrim is still on his rock. The spray is catching the last of the light and turning it into something briefly, extravagantly beautiful. A fine mist of gold and white around him. The waterfall behind him, thundering its constant white noise. The fiddle, still moving in his hands with that quality of effortless, water-like inevitability. He has not acknowledged you. He will not acknowledge you. But the music has shifted, very slightly, in the time you have been sitting here. Something in it has changed. Not the structure, not the melody, not the fundamental quality of what it is. Just a quality in it. A warmth that perhaps was not quite there before you arrived. A responsiveness, barely perceptible, like the way a fire responds to a new presence in the room, not by doing anything different, but by seeming somehow more itself. He knows you are here. He is playing for you. Not only for you, the music was here before you, and will be here after. But the way the river includes everything that falls into it, without stopping or redirecting for anything, you are included. Your presence, your listening, your stillness, and your patience, and the fact that you have been sitting here long enough for the cold of the spray to settle into your clothes. All of it is in the music now. All of it is part of what the waterfall is doing tonight. You can stay as long as you like. The Fossegrim will not send you away. But there is something waiting, further into the forest. Something that has been drawn here by the same music you followed, that has been standing at the edge of the trees, listening with the focused, slightly tilted attention of a creature for whom beautiful sound is an almost physical pull. She has been here longer than you. she is always drawn to the music. The Huldra. She is at the edge of the tree line. You would not have noticed her if you had not been looking in exactly the right direction at exactly the right moment. And even now, knowing she is there, your eye wants to slide past her, to resolve her into something ordinary. A trick of the light between the trees, the particular way a birch trunk catches the last of the evening glow and holds it, pale and luminous, against the dark of the forest behind. But it is not a birch trunk. She is very still. The stillness of something that has been standing in exactly that spot for long enough to have become part of the visual texture of the forest. Not hiding, not concealing herself with any particular effort, simply present in the way that wild things are present when they are not alarmed and not hunting, and not doing anything except existing in their own place, in their own way, which is to say completely and without apology. She is tall, taller than you expected, though you are not sure what you expected. The accounts vary. Some describe her as ordinary in height, easily mistaken for a human woman from a distance. Others describe her as something larger, something that the forest scale fits better than the human scale. What the accounts agree on is this: she is beautiful, with a beauty that is not decorative but essential, not the beauty of something that has been arranged to be beautiful, but the beauty of something that simply is, the way the forest is, the way the waterfall is, without design or intention. Her hair is long, very long, and the colour of it, in this light, in this particular mix of the last daylight and the rising dark, is the colour of old wood, of the heartwood of a felled tree, that deep, warm, reddish brown that is nothing like the bark outside and everything like the tree inside. And her back, this is the thing the stories always mention, the thing that distinguishes her, that marks her as something other than what she almost appears to be. Her back is hollow, not in a terrible way, not grotesque, not the hollow of damage or absence, the hollow of a tree, the smooth, curved, organic hollow of the interior of a very old tree trunk, beautiful in its own way. The grain of the wood, visible in the dim light, the shape of it suggesting not emptiness, but depth, the inside of something rather than the outside. A door, perhaps, though to where and of what kind is a question the tradition has never quite answered and perhaps was never meant to. She is the Huldra. In Norway, the Huldra. In Sweden, the Skogsrå, the forest spirit, the forest guardian, the roar of the woods. Different names in different traditions, with slightly different emphasis, slightly different qualities, but the same essential being. The female spirit of the deep forest. Not a goddess, not in the grand, sky-dwelling, world-organizing sense. Something more intimate than that, more local, more specifically, completely, entirely of this forest, this mountain, this particular stretch of wild ground that she has been the spirit of since the forest was young. She is older than the trees. This is said plainly in the oldest accounts, without drama or qualification. The Huldra was here before the forest. She will be here after. The trees are her domain, but they are not her origin. She preceded them, and the forest grew into a landscape that already had her in it, the way a house is built around a hearth that was already there. She has moods. This is important to understand before we go any further. The Huldra is not simply benign. She is not the gentle, purely helpful spirit of the home, not the bean tige of the forest. not the grogosh of the wild places. She is a creature of the deep woods, and the deep woods are not always safe, and she reflects that. She has a gentler aspect and a more dangerous one, and which you encounter depends on a combination of factors: who you are, how you have treated the forest, whether the Fossegrim's music is in the air tonight, and something less definable than any of those things: her mood, her own quality on this particular evening. The forest, like the sea, is not obligated to be hospitable. In her dangerous aspect, and I will address this, because to pretend she has no dangerous aspect would be to do her a disservice and to mislead you, which is not something I am willing to do. The Huldra is a figure who leads men into the deep forest and does not lead them back out. There are accounts from the logging communities and the hunting communities of rural Norway and Sweden of men who followed a beautiful woman into the trees and were found days later, if they were found, dazed and disoriented and unable to account for the time. There are accounts of men who were not found. She does not do this out of malice, exactly. She does it the way the forest does it, because the forest does not keep track of who has entered and who has left, because the forest's relationship with the people who move through it has never been one of guaranteed safe passage, because there is something in the deep wild that does not owe us anything, and occasionally reminds us of this in ways we find uncomfortable. The Huldra is that something, given form and face, and the specific, particular, deeply personal quality of something that can look at you and decide. But this is not her only aspect. In her gentler stories, and there are many, told with the same conviction as the dangerous ones, the Huldra is something else entirely. A guardian, a protector of the forest and everything in it, including the humans who enter it with the right spirit and the right awareness. The woodcutters and hunters and foresters who treated the forest with respect, who took only what they needed, who did not waste, who moved through the wild places with the particular quality of attention that acknowledges the forest as inhabited rather than merely as resource. These people had nothing to fear from the Huldra. More than that, they had her protection. There are accounts of lost hunters who found themselves suddenly and inexplicably on a path they recognized, heading toward home, with no clear memory of how the forest had rearranged itself around them, but a strong and specific sense of having been guided. Of lost children found safe at the edge of the tree line, unable to explain how they got there, but describing, sometimes, a woman who showed them the way. The Huldra knows every path in the forest, every path, and every person who has ever walked them. She watches. This is the quality that runs through both aspects of her, the dangerous and the gentle, the leading in and the guiding out, the beautiful face and the hollow back. She watches with a completeness and a continuity of attention that no human guardian could sustain, because she is not watching as an activity, not watching in the way of someone doing the watching rather than something else. Watching is what she is, the forest's awareness of itself, given form. When you are in the forest, truly in the forest, in the old growth, in the places where the trees are dense enough and old enough that the light changes quality and the sounds of the outside world can no longer be heard, she knows you are there. She has known since you crossed the tree line. She knows your name in the sense that matters. Not the name people call you, but the name that describes what you actually are, the assessment that the forest makes of every person who enters it, whether you are there to take or to receive, whether you are paying attention or merely passing through, whether you are the kind of person who, standing in the deep forest on a still evening with the Fossegrim's music drifting through the trees, stops and listens, or keeps walking. She is still at the edge of the trees. She has not moved in all the time you have been aware of her, which is both reassuring and in some way that is difficult to articulate, slightly more concerning than movement would have been. The stillness of a thing that is deciding something is different from the stillness of a thing that has decided. She is deciding. You can feel it. What she is deciding exactly is between her and the forest, and whatever assessment she has been making of you since you sat by the Fossegrim's pool and listened without reaching for anything. The music from the waterfall continues behind you. The forest in front of you is very dark and very deep and full of everything it has always been full of. The ancient, patient, endlessly complex life of a place that has been doing this for longer than anyone has been watching. She tilts her head, very slightly, the way something wild tilts its head when it has made up its mind about you. And then, so slowly that you are not sure it is happening until it has already happened, she smiles. Not a large smile, not performed. The small, private, slightly complicated smile of something that has been watching you for a while and has decided, after due consideration, that you are all right, that you have been paying attention, that you are, in the specific sense that matters to the Huldra, in the specific language of the forest at this specific hour. Welcome here. She turns and walks into the trees. Not quickly, not with any urgency, with the unhurried, ground-covering ease of something entirely at home in the dark, moving between the trunks without touching them, the forest rearranging itself around her passage, the way water rearranges itself around a stone. She does not look back. She does not need to. You know, without being told, that this is not abandonment, that the forest she is walking into is not closed to you, that her turning away is not a dismissal, but an invitation of a particular kind, the invitation of something that trusts you enough to show you its back, the hollow back, which is, you understand now, not a flaw and not a wound. It is a door. It has always been a door. The door into the inside of the forest, into the part of the wild that does not show itself to everyone, that requires a certain quality of presence and patience, and the willingness to sit by a cold waterfall in the dark and listen to music that was not made for you, and love it anyway. The forest is very quiet now. The Fossegrim's music has not stopped. It never stops. But it is further away, or perhaps you have simply moved far enough into the trees that the waterfall sound no longer carries. The light is nearly gone. The first stars are appearing through the gaps in the canopy. Very bright, very close. The stars of a Nordic sky at the beginning of a clear night. The wild places are behind us now. All of them. The high rock of the trolls. The dancing light of the Älvor. The waterfall and its musician. We have been in the old, deep, pre-human part of the Nordic world, and it has been extraordinary, vast and cold and beautiful, and full of things that have been here since before any human name was given to any of it. But something is changing. The trees are thinning. The ground beneath your feet is becoming more even. more worn, the worn, smooth quality of ground that has been walked by the same feet, taking the same route for many generations. The smell of the forest is giving way to something else, something warmer, something that speaks of walls and fires, and the particular, irreplaceable warmth of a place where people have been living for a long time and intend to keep living. Wood smoke. And underneath the wood smoke, if you are close enough, if the night is still enough, something else. The smell of porridge, left out on the step, just inside the farmhouse door, in the warm amber interior of a kitchen that has been here for generations. Something small is moving, something that has been here since before the current family and will be here long after. Something that knows every board in this floor and every draft in this roof and every child that has grown up in these rooms and considers all of it without question and without condition, entirely under its care. Come inside. You are nearly home. Close the door behind you. Feel the difference immediately. The way the cold and the dark and the vast, indifferent outdoors become in the single movement of a door closing, something on the other side of a boundary rather than something you are inside of. The warmth of the kitchen reaches you all at once, not just the temperature, the whole quality of it, the smell of the fire and the food and the particular, accumulated, completely irreplaceable smell of a house that has been lived in by the same family for long enough that the building itself has absorbed something of them. Their warmth, their habits, the specific domestic rhythm of their days. You are inside now. You are somewhere that has been made over many generations of careful, loving, completely unheroic effort into a home. And a home, in the Nordic world, is never entirely empty of company. Look at the corner by the hearth. Not directly. You know by now how to look at things that do not wish to be looked at directly. The peripheral gaze, the soft eye, the receptive attention of someone who has spent this whole night learning to see what is actually there, rather than what they expected to find. There. Small. Very small. The size of a child, perhaps. Or smaller, depending on the account and the tradition and the specific household. Wearing grey, usually, or the deep red of the older tellings. A pointed cap. Always the cap. In every account from every corner of the Nordic world. The cap that is as much a part of him as his hands or his expression, and that he would sooner part with his name than his hat. Sitting very still in the warmth of the fire, with his knees drawn up, and his bright, dark, extraordinarily attentive eyes moving slowly around the room in the particular way of something that is not looking for anything specific, but is, simply, keeping track. The Nisse, or the Tomte, if you are in Sweden. Tomt from Tom, meaning the plot of land on which a house stands, the specific ground of a specific home. The Tomte is, in his very name, a creature of a particular place, not a wandering spirit, not a being that moves between households according to season or circumstance. He is of this farm, this ground, this specific, irreplaceable piece of land that someone, long ago, chose to build a life on. In Norway and Denmark, the Nisse. In Sweden, the Tomte. The same being, essentially. The household spirit, the farm guardian, the small ancient presence that has been keeping this particular household since long before any living member of the family was born and intends. Quietly, and without any fanfare whatsoever, to keep it long after they are gone. He is very old. This is the first thing to understand about the Nisse. Not old in the way of a grandparent, or even of a very old building. Old in the way of the land itself. Old in the way of something that has been in this place since the first human being decided to make this place a home, and has been accumulating knowledge of it and care for it ever since. He knows this household the way no living member of it will ever know it. From the foundation stones to the ridge beam, from the first family that built it to the current one, from the good years and the hard years and the ordinary years that make up the long, unheroic, entirely sufficient life of a farm that has been doing what farms do for generation after generation. He has watched all of it. He remembers all of it, and he cares about all of it with the particular, unsentimental, completely reliable care of something that has never had any choice in the matter, and would not choose differently if it had. What does the Nisse do? In the simplest terms, everything that needs doing that no one else is doing. He tends the animals in the barn through the long winter nights, checking on them with the practiced, attentive competence of someone who has been reading the health of livestock for centuries and knows immediately when something is wrong that the farmer will not notice until morning. He keeps the fire. He moves through the house in the small hours, checking the things that need checking. The roof where it is weak, the door that does not quite seal against the north wind, the corner of the grain store where moisture is beginning to threaten the winter's food. He does not do this dramatically. He does not leave evidence of his presence generally, does not want recognition or gratitude or any acknowledgement that his work is being done. He wants the household to run well. That is all. The running well is its own reward, in the way that the deeply satisfying completion of necessary work is its own reward for someone who genuinely cares about the work. The Nisse cares about the work. He cares about the household. He cares, in his own ancient, unexpressive, completely genuine way, about the family. Not sentimentally. He is not a sentimental being. He has been here too long and seen too much to sentimentalize the human beings he tends. He knows their faults as well as their qualities. He has watched their arguments and their failures and their small daily unkindnesses to each other with the patient, slightly tired, entirely unjudging attention of something that has seen all of it many times before and knows that this is simply what humans are, imperfect and trying, and occasionally, when the conditions are right, genuinely good. He tends them anyway, without condition, without the possibility of being discouraged from it. There is one rule. In all the centuries of accounts of the Nisse across all the Nordic countries, in all the variations of his appearance and his habits, and the specific things he does in specific households, there is one rule that appears in every single account, without exception, emphasized with a consistency that suggests it has been learned the hard way more than once. The porridge. Every year, on Christmas Eve. Yule, in the Nordic tradition, the great midwinter feast, the turning of the year, the long night from which the light slowly returns. The household leaves a bowl of porridge for the Nisse. Not elaborate porridge, not special porridge. The good, honest, properly made porridge of a household that knows what it is doing. With butter on top. Always butter, always specifically butter. This detail is not negotiable. Left in the place he is known to inhabit. The barn, Usually, the corner of the kitchen, the step. This is not a payment. This is the distinction that matters most and that the old accounts are most careful to make. The porridge is not a transaction. It is not payment for services rendered, not a wage for the work of the year. It is an acknowledgement, a recognition. The annual, formal, entirely sincere statement that the household knows he is there, knows what he does, and is glad of it. The Nisse, who has been tending this household all year without acknowledgement or expectation, who has been keeping the animals warm and the fire alive and the weak beam in the roof from becoming a crisis. The Nisse receives this bowl of porridge, and it matters to him. Not because he is hungry, not because the porridge is a material benefit, because it means that the household sees him, that after all the quiet, invisible, uncelebrated work of the year, there is this one moment of being seen. That is enough. That is for the Nisse, everything. There are stories, and they are told with a mixture of comedy and genuine pathos that suggests the tellers understood the emotional truth of them, of what happens when the porridge is forgotten, or left without butter, or left with butter hidden under the porridge in the misguided belief that the Nisse would find this funny. He does not find this funny. The Nisse who has been forgotten, or slighted, or worst of all, had his intelligence insulted by a household that thought it could put the butter underneath. This Nisse becomes, for a period, considerably less helpful than he has been. Animals are moved. Tools are misplaced. The weak beam in the roof becomes suddenly a problem that was not attended to. Not maliciously. The Nisse is not malicious, but with the specific, targeted, entirely reasonable withdrawal of goodwill from a being who has given a great deal of it and received in return not even the small annual acknowledgement that was the only thing ever asked. The remedy is always the same. Make the porridge again, with the butter, on top, and leave it in the right place, with the right quality of acknowledgement. Sincere, not performative. The genuine awareness of a household that has remembered what it had and is glad to have it back. The Nisse will return to his work. He always does. He cannot help it. This place is his. There is a quality to the old accounts of the Nisse that I find more moving than almost anything else in the whole of Nordic folklore. It is the quality of long faithfulness, of a commitment that has nothing to do with contract or obligation, or any of the arrangements that humans make between themselves to ensure that care continues. The Nisse's commitment to his household is simply what he is, what he has always been, the expression of something so fundamental to his nature that questioning it would be like questioning why water runs downhill. He is here because this is where he is. He cares because caring is what he does. He will be here long after everyone who lives in this house now is gone, and he will tend the next family with the same complete, unreserved, entirely reliable care, and the family after that, and the family after that, until the house falls, and perhaps even after. Standing in the ruins of a very old farmhouse in the Swedish countryside, on a still evening in late autumn, you might sometimes feel something, a quality in the air around the old stones, a warmth that the stones themselves are not warm enough to explain. The sense, standing in what is left of the walls, of a presence, small and old and deeply, unshakably attached to this ground, still here, still keeping watch, still in whatever way is available to a Nisse whose house is gone, doing what he has always done, taking care of things. The Nisse in the corner has not moved. He is watching the fire with the focused, satisfied attention of someone whose work is mostly done for this evening. The animals are settled. The household is quiet. The wheat board in the barn floor has been dealt with in a way that the farmer will notice tomorrow and attribute to the wood drying out, which is not entirely wrong. His cap is very red in the firelight. His eyes are very bright. He is in his corner, in his warmth, in his house that has been his house since before any living member of this family was born. Perfectly content. Not happy in the way of creatures that require events to make them happy. Content in the deeper sense. The sense of a being that is exactly where it is supposed to be, doing exactly what it is supposed to do, in a place that is entirely and completely its own. There is one more creature to meet tonight, the last one, and it is fitting that it is the last. Not because it is the most powerful, or the most ancient, or the most mythologically significant by any scholarly measure, but because it is the most beloved, because of all the creatures we have met tonight, all the hidden ones, and the wild ones, and the deep ones, and the ancient ones. This one has travelled furthest from its origins into the hearts of the people who know it, and has done so not through power or drama, but through the simple, irresistible, completely disarming means of being genuinely, warmly, absolutely delightfully itself. The night is at its deepest now. The Nisse is in his corner. The fire is low and steady. And outside, just outside the window, in the snow that has been falling softly since the middle of the evening, there is the sound of small feet, and then a knock at the door. Not a large knock, a very small one. The knock of someone who is not entirely sure of their welcome, but is nonetheless here. Who is, in fact, always here at this time of year. Who has in fact been looking forward to this for quite some time. Open the door. He is standing in the snow, not dramatically, not with any of the grandeur that later versions of this figure accumulated around themselves over the centuries of retelling and reimagining, and the enormous, glittering machinery of what he eventually became. Just standing in the snow at your door, small, smaller than you expected, if you were expecting anything at all, smaller than the stories made him sound, smaller than the shadow he has cast across the midwinter celebrations of half the world, rosy-cheeked from the cold, his cap pulled down against the wind, a sack over his shoulder that is, by the look of it, considerably heavier than something his size should comfortably carry. And yet, he is carrying it with the ease of long practice, the ease of someone who has been doing this particular thing for so long that the weight of it has ceased to register as weight and become simply a part of what it feels like to be himself on this particular night. He looks up at you, and his expression, this is the thing no illustration has ever quite captured, though many have tried. His expression is not the jolly, performed, public-facing beaming of the figure he eventually became. It is something quieter than that, something more personal, the expression of someone who has been out in the cold for a long time, doing something they believe in, and has arrived at a door that is open, and is, in this moment, simply glad. The Julenisse. Let me tell you where he comes from. because his history is one of the most extraordinary in any mythology. A story of transformation so complete and so far-reaching that the original figure has almost disappeared inside what it became, and finding him again requires going back a long way through a great deal of tinsel and commercial imagery to the small, ancient, cold-weather farmyard reality of what he actually was. He begins with the Nisse, specifically with the Nisse at Yule. In the old Nordic tradition, the Nisse, who had tended the farm all year, had a particular significance at midwinter. Yule, the great winter feast, the turning of the year, the long celebration that began at the solstice and ran for days, during which the darkness was at its most complete and the warmth of the household at its most essential, and the presence of the household's guardian spirit at its most deeply felt. The Nisse, who was always there but rarely seen, seemed, according to the old accounts, more present at Yule than at any other time, more active, more aware, moving through the house with a quality of energy that was slightly different from his usual quiet maintenance. Something anticipatory in it, something almost celebratory. He loved Yule. This is in the accounts. Plainly and consistently, the Nisse loved the midwinter feast. He loved the warmth and the food and the gathering of the family, and the particular quality of a household that has turned inward against the dark and found in the turning that it contains more than it knew. More warmth, more love, more willingness to be good to each other than the ordinary frictions of daily life sometimes make visible. At Yule, he was more himself than at any other time. And gradually, over centuries, through the slow, organic process by which folklore evolves, the Yule Nisse became a distinct figure. Not just the household spirit at his most festive, but something with his own specific character, his own specific night, his own specific relationship to the children of the household. The Julenisse. He came at Christmas, at Yule, with gifts. Not grand gifts, not the overwhelming abundance of later tradition. Small gifts, modest gifts. The gifts of a being who has been watching the children of this household all year and knows what each of them needs and cares about. A carved toy, a piece of preserved fruit, something warm for the cold months ahead. He left them in the night, and in the morning the children found them and knew without being told who had left them, because there was only one being who knew them that well and cared about them, that consistently, and had no interest in credit or acknowledgement, but simply wanted, on the longest night of the year, to give them something good. This is the original Julenisse. Not the global figure he became, not the red-suited, reindeer-commanding, workshop-managing, list-checking enormity that the 19th and 20th centuries constructed around him, with the considerable help of department stores and Coca-Cola advertisements and the whole magnificent apparatus of commercial Christmas. That figure is real too, in his own way. He has accrued genuine warmth and genuine meaning over the centuries of accumulation, and I do not want to simply dismiss him, because the children who believe in him believe in something that is not entirely false. But he is not this. This is older, smaller, more personal. This is the Julenisse of the farmhouse kitchen, standing in the snow at your door, with his sack over his shoulder, red-cheeked and tired and glad to have arrived. He knows this house. He has known this house since it was built. He knows the creaks in the floorboards and the smell of the kitchen in winter, and the way the firelight falls across the faces of the people inside. He knows which child is afraid of the dark, and which one pretends to be braver than they are, and which one has been having a difficult year in the particular, wordless, invisible way that children have difficult years, without being able to articulate it, without any obvious external cause, simply carrying something that the adults around them have not quite managed to see. He has seen it. He has been seeing it all year. And on this night, the longest night, the coldest night, the night when the darkness is at its most complete and the year is balanced on the edge of its own turning, he has come with something specific for each of them, not just the object in the sack, something more fundamental than that. The knowledge, delivered not in words but in the simple, sufficient act of his presence on the doorstep, that someone has been paying attention all along, that the household is known, that the children are seen, that the year, however hard or however easy, has been witnessed by something ancient and warm and entirely devoted to the well-being of this specific family, in this specific house, on this specific cold and starlit night. This is what gift-giving actually is, at its best. Not the transfer of objects, the expression of knowledge, the proof, in tangible form, that someone was paying enough attention to know what was needed. The Julenisse knows what is needed. He always has. There is a moment in the old tradition that I want to describe because it captures something true about what the Julenisse actually is and what Yule actually means in the old understanding of it. It is late. The feast is over. The children are asleep. Finally, after the particular, wired, wide-eyed, completely irresistible sleeplessness of children on a significant night who know that something is going to happen and cannot quite let themselves stop watching for it. The adults are tired. The fire is lower than it was. The house is warm and quiet and dark except for the firelight and the particular blue-white quality of the snow-reflected moonlight coming through the window. And the Julenisse is in the kitchen. Not the dramatic, grand arrival. He has been here for a while already, the way he is always here, through the wall or the door or some other means that the old accounts are deliberately vague about, because the how of it is not the point. He is in the kitchen, and the sack is open, and he is moving through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows exactly where everything goes and how long he has before the light begins. He pauses at the door of the room where the children are sleeping. He stands there for a moment, just a moment, listening to the slow, completely surrendered breathing of children in deep sleep. The particular sound of it, the sound of small people who have finally and completely let go of the day and given themselves over to the dark and the warmth and the safety of the house around them. He is very still. This is the moment. Not the gifts, not the feast, not the singing, or the candles, or any of the beautiful apparatus of the celebration. This moment, this small figure in the doorway of the children's room in the deep of the longest night, listening to them breathe. This is what Yule is. This is what all the feasting and the gathering and the turning toward each other in the dark has always been about. The protection of this. The small warm room. The sleeping children. The fire kept through the night. The knowledge, held and renewed each year in the long, cold, dark heart of winter, that the things worth keeping are still here. Still warm, still breathing, still held. He finishes his work. He moves back through the kitchen, pausing briefly at the bowl of porridge on the step. He looks at it for a moment. The butter is on top. Of course, it is on top. This is a household that knows what it is doing, that has not forgotten and has never needed to be reminded, that leaves the porridge every year with the same quiet sincerity that the old acknowledgement has always required. He eats the porridge, slowly, standing on the step in the cold, looking out at the snow-covered farmyard, the barn where the animals are settled and warm, the fields beyond it lying still and white under the enormous Nordic sky, the stars very bright and very close in the clear winter air. He is, in this moment, completely himself, the ancient household spirit on his ancient night, doing his ancient work in the old and beautiful and entirely sufficient way he has always done it. Not jolly exactly, not the performed, expansive jolliness of what he became. Something quieter and more genuine, the deep, settled midwinter satisfaction of a being that is exactly where it is supposed to be, doing exactly what it was made for, on the night that matters most. He finishes the porridge. He sets the bowl down carefully. He pulls his cap against the wind, and he goes. Not with fanfare, not with the sound of bells or the clatter of hooves on a rooftop. Simply gone, the way he always goes, the way the warmth of a fire goes when the fire is out. Not present in any locatable way, but not absent either. Still here, in the quality of the air in the kitchen. Still here, in the warmth that persists in the bowl he set down. Still here, in the house that he has tended and will tend, and that carries, in its walls and its floors, and the specific, irreplaceable smell of it on a winter morning, his long, faithful, entirely devoted attention. The children will wake soon. The light is already changing in the east. That first, barely perceptible shift in the quality of the dark that means the night has passed its deepest point and the long turning back toward light has begun. It will be hours yet before dawn, but the direction has changed. The year is turning. The Nisse is in his corner. The porridge bowl is empty on the step. And somewhere in the farmyard, already heading toward the next house on his ancient and unhurried circuit of the long Nordic night, the Julenisse, small and warm and laden and glad, doing what he has always done, what he will always do, on the longest night, for as long as there are houses with fires in them and children sleeping soundly inside, and someone who remembers to leave the porridge out with the butter on top. And so the Nordic night settles. The fire is low. The Nisse is in his corner. The Julenisse is long gone, out into the snow and the dark and the long circuit of the winter night, carrying his sack and his ancient, faithful, completely unhurried care from one lit window to the next. We have come a long way tonight, down through the hidden world, through the lava rock of Iceland, where the Huldufólk go about their parallel lives behind walls we cannot see, through the fields of Scandinavia, where the Vittra watch everything that happens in the land above them, down into the deep, stone dark, where the Tusser tend their underground rooms, and the Dwarves keep their forges burning with the focused, exacting, completely uncompromising devotion of people who understand that the quality of the work is not a preference, but a principle, up onto the high places, where the trolls have been sitting on their boulders since before the glacier, and will be sitting there long after every road we have ever built has returned to the earth it came from, into the forest at the turn of the day, where the Älvor danced in the last of the light with that particular, purposeless, entirely sufficient joy of things that are simply being what they are. To the waterfall, to the Fossegrim and his fiddle, and the music that's been running alongside the water since before anyone had a word for either of them, into the deep forest where the Huldra stood at the edge of the trees and made her assessment and decided, in her own time and on her own terms, that you were worthy of the smile, and home, to the warmth and the porridge and the ancient, faithful, red-capped guardians of the household and the year. This is the Nordic world, not the world of gods at war and the end of everything. That world is real, and other voices tell it well. This is the quieter world, the one that runs underneath the grand mythology, the way the Vittra run underneath the fields, present, patient, keeping things in order, asking only that you remember it is there. A world that understood, early and completely, that the darkness is not the enemy, that the long winter night is not something to be defeated, but something to be inhabited, warmly, together, with good food and good fire, and the stories that remind you, in the deepest and coldest part of the year, that the light is coming back, that it always comes back. The veil is thinning now. The Nordic night is still there. The snow and the stars, and the enormous cold sky, and somewhere in the dark, the sound of a fiddle still playing at a waterfall that does not sleep. It will be there when we are gone. It was there before we arrived. The hidden world does not require our presence to continue being what it is, but we are stepping back now, back through the veil, back to wherever you are. Whatever the hour, whatever the light outside your window, whatever the particular quality of the world around you as these words reach their end, carry something with you, if you can. The dwarf's insistence that the work be right, the troll's long patience, the Fossegrim's gift to the person who came to the waterfall, not to take something but simply because the music called and they had the sense to follow. The Nisse's faithfulness, that ancient, unsentimental, completely unconditional care for the specific place and the specific people that is not glamorous and not celebrated, and is, perhaps for exactly those reasons, one of the most quietly extraordinary things in the whole wide world of folklore. The knowledge that the ground is inhabited, that the world goes deeper than your foundations, that on the longest night, someone leaves the porridge out, with the butter on top. The veil is thin here. We have been across it together. Until next time.